Hello everybody and welcome to Documentation Not Included. It's 7 PM UK time here on twitch.tv/DNI stream, and we're about to launch into episode 2.9, Tech Debt Consolidation. As I'm sure most of you know by now, my name's Chris, and today I'm joined by my co-host, Patrick.
Hello Chris, and hello everyone in Twitch chat. If you have anything to say during the show, please do get involved. We read out any comments there that are relevant or funny, and also feel free to tell us off when we actually get sidetracked, because, you know, Joss is not with us again, she's on holiday. But yeah, things will be back to normal next week.
Yeah, she'll be back with us, well rested and ready to crack the whip, I believe. So yes, today our guest is Mark Walsh. He's a developer I worked with back in 2013 at a startup in Liverpool, and I think that startup ended up being bought out by a big American company. I was actually part of the reason that happened. I think I was brought in to improve, make the software cost, be worth more or something, and as with many other contractors there. And yeah, so Mark has a lot of startup experience. If you'd like to tell our listeners what you do, what you're involved in these days, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So quite a lot of experience with startups myself, as Chris mentioned before. I was working at a startup when Chris joined the startup. I then joined another startup as a more senior developer and sort of worked my way up into a tech lead, and that's me today. Sort of a jack of all trades, as you are commonly in startups. And yeah, that's basically me.
Good stuff. So yes, before we get going, it's icebreaker time. Now, an icebreaker is something we ask all of our guests before, well, not just guests, everybody on the show, before we get going, just to get us to know you a little bit better and get our listeners to understand how we think. It's usually something not related to tech, and it's also something that's not really related to the show at all. I've got one this week again. If you could run a talk show, what would your first three guests be? Or who would your first three guests be?
Of all the people.
Of all the people in the world, dead, alive, historical. I'm going to let Pat go today, so Mark can have a think.
Jeez, I wanted to think about it too.
Well, I'll tell you what, I've got mine ready, so shall I for once go first? Because I'm usually the one who offloads. Yeah, okay, so first of all, it would be John Romero, who was the guy who created, as well as John Carmack and another guy, Tim Willits, was it? I'm not sure actually. There was three guys who created id Software, who created the Quake and Doom franchises. The reason for that is that they invented the FPS genre and the deathmatch and that kind of thing. And every time I see John Romero on anything, he's really interested in that. He's the same with John Carmack, to be fair, but he's a lot more technical, a lot more kind of geeky and geek focused. Second one is someone I've used quite a few times in situations like this, Ava Lovelace. She was the very first computer scientist ever. She worked with a guy called Charles Babbage, English I believe as well, who created the very first computer, or what was it called, the difference machine or something like that. It was a big massive thing that had big wheels churning, and she worked on the very first algorithm. She didn't actually sit down and type a computer, but she worked on the very first computer algorithm. And the last one would be some kind of serial killer, just because I really want to. I'm fascinated by like true crime and how like serial killers, how do they even get into that mindset? I mean, I know a lot of them are mentally unstable, but yeah, so that's me. I've hopefully give you time there to think, Pat.
Yeah, and I've actually got my three too. So
okay.
with a caveat that it will be explicitly gaming talk show.
Okay.
I'd love to have Elon Musk, simply because I think it will be kind of funny and interesting, given that recently he's been trying to put video games into his Teslas. So,
okay. I didn't know that.
Clearly he's a nerd, so, it'd be interesting to pick his brain about video games. Because, he's been talking about anime and obviously about rockets and stuff like that, but not much about video. Second person, Total Biscuit. Because, man, I miss that guy. For those who don't know, he was really amazing PC games reviewer. I think one of the best. And unfortunately, he died of cancer. And man, it's such a shame, because I'd love him. I'd love to have him, try a game that I'm working on, but I can't because he's not with us anymore. And the third person, and that's why it will have to be a gaming show, and that we should talk about video games, is that I would love to have Donald Trump. Because it would be amazing to hear him speak about video games. Can you just imagine this?
No, I can't. Well, it'll be the same as every other subject.
Video games. I'm the best at video games. I'm a MLG pro. It'd be great.
So, Mark, does that give you enough time to think of 3 yourself?
Yeah, but I think my talk show would probably be more of a general sort of, you know, let's just talk about anything kind of talk show. I don't think I'd be able to have like especially with the guests that I would pick, there would be absolutely no genre whatsoever.
Yeah, go on.
So, so I'd probably start off with Da Vinci, Leonardo da Vinci, and that's only just basically because he seems like a genius. Some of the stuff that he sort of designed seems just impossible for that era.
Yeah.
He is really a fascinating character. Second one is probably someone that a lot of people would say, and presuming that I can communicate with him in English, probably Hitler. Mostly
one.
To ask him, mostly to ask him why and stop.
Just read Mein Kampf. I'll tell you why.
Well,
I've got that on my Amazon wish list, and I'm still waiting for a phone call from some authority somewhere.
Yeah, soon you'll have to have a license to read the books.
yeah.
Dangerous books.
And I realise that I'm just choosing historical characters, but I'm quite interested in history.
Yeah,
It's one of my interests. But also probably Henry VIII.
Okay.
Because he seemed like a bit of a character.
An awful man. He also seems like an absolutely awful man.
There's a common theme with my selections. 2 out of the 3 of them seem like awful men.
Seem like Hitler. News, everybody. Hitler seems like an awful person.
I mean, let's not jump to the conclusions. Come on.
Brilliant.
This is not a good audition on a podcast, is it? No, one definitely is an awful guy. Henry VIII just seems like a very strange man. The whole taking on the Catholic Church thing.
Headstrong,
headstrong. I'd particularly like to meet him when he was. He needed a lift to be put into. I can't remember where he was living at the time, but they had to construct like a medieval lift just to get him up the stairs because he had such bad gout that he couldn't even climb the stairs.
There's lots of stories that you don't get taught in school about Henry VIII that you find out when you're an adult.
Yeah.
I mean, there's generally a lot of stories about nobility that are.
So, UE90, or Awesome 90, I think, as Josie called her the other week, it says, I think this is in response to Patrick's, why not both get Elon and Donald to sit down together and watch chaos unwind? Can you imagine them two even having a civil conversation, though?
They did, because for a while Elon Musk was on his technology advisor board, and he got a lot of flack for it, A lot of people hated him because he was like, oh, how can you talk with the orange cheetah monster? I mean, it's an approach, but, maybe let's steer away from the politics before we get nuked out of orbit and talk about the actual topic of today's podcast, which is tech debt, consolidation. So, Mark, let's start simple. What is a tech debt?
So tech debt is basically time, essentially. I know that's a very simplistic way of putting it, but it's basically stealing time from yourself. So it works in the same way. I saw a really good explanation of it, of comparing it to monetary debt. So it's kind of like a loan debt. It only grows, and eventually you are going to have to repay that debt. So that is probably the best way of thinking about tech debt as a debt. But there are many different types of tech debt, all of which cost time, and all of which need to be repaid at some point.
So we are specifically focusing on development tech debt here, though. We're not because you've got a lot of experience managing it and inheriting it. So unlike unlike monetary debt, I think that does die with you. I think in most cultures anyway.
Well, It's also useful to say that tech debt is not only software related. There is also hardware related tech debt, which is most visible with countries' infrastructures. Internet infrastructure in the US. US has one of the worst internets only because they were the first ones to start, so that their technology was, pretty primitive at the time. Whereas one of the best internets in the entire world has Romania because they laid down the fiber optic cables first.
Yeah, and I think that it can be applied at a smaller scale as well. I was working with a company, a very large company, quite a few years ago now, and part of the project, I was part of a much larger transformation project where they were moving from Windows. This is hideous. Windows 98 to Windows 7, and Windows 8.1 was the recommended one to work with there. The reason they were doing that is because it hadn't been signed off by upper management or the higher beings rather, but they still had. There was essentially they were paying off some of the debt, but they were just going to have to keep paying that debt off. But that would keep applying as well. Even if they went up to Windows 8.1, they would still have to keep updating with new OS releases. So, in your world then, Mark, specifically, so are you currently dealing with tech debt right now? And large amounts of it, or are you talking about previous experiences?
Yeah, so I'm more talking about. So when I joined my current company, there was masses of tech debt. So we're sort of over the hill in that respect, and that's really where all the kind of experience comes from. But I think there's an argument to be made that you constantly accrue tech debt anyway. And there's different types of, there's different ways, of how you can accrue that tech debt. So my biggest sort of experience comes from bit rot, which is small incremental changes over a number of years.
Right. I've not heard that term before, bit rot.
Well, yeah.
Self-explanatory,
Yeah, self-explanatory, but it's basically just small changes, defect changes, or adding to the code base without actually looking at the architecture as in the direction that it's going, without stopping and sort of saying, okay, now is time to rewrite this because it's become a monolith or it's become a monster.
Yeah. And
it's too hard to read, too hard to maintain. So that's probably my most experience is in that kind of tech debt. And there obviously are other types of tech debt.
Yeah. So I mean, what would be the best way to mitigate that though? That particular type of tech debt. So this bit rot. What would you? I mean, the way that I look at code when I write it is, I look at code as art. I'll use the Da Vinci. Here we go. We'll go back to your icebreaker. I use the Da Vinci quote, which I'll paraphrase Da Vinci quote: "Software is never finished, only abandoned." And it's applicable to everything. So you have a circular cycle. You've got the SDLC, the software delivery development life cycle, or whatever you want to call it, and you're constantly maintaining it. You're constantly writing new features. You're constantly getting updates and requests from either users or from customers, and you're constantly adding to your code base. Now, naturally, you add some tech debt at that point. In fact, you accrue tech debt just by virtue of writing code in a older version. For example, when Link came out in the .NET world, suddenly everything that used to be a stored procedure now needed not everything. A lot of things that used to be a stored procedure, everybody now wanted to move into Link, and that became essentially tech debt. Now, is tech debt dictated by the technology shifts, or is it dictated by the design patterns, or is it both?
I would argue that it is definitely both. I've got a great example of, as you just said, another example. .NET Core, the introduction of .NET Core, with the ability to run on Linux, obviously opens a lot more doors infrastructurally, as well as it being a new framework and new and shiny, and everyone wants to write code on it. But yeah, so at the minute in my current company, the process that we're going through now is basically converting assemblies to .NET standard. So,
is there a business reason for that, or is that just because it's new and shiny?
There is a business reason. In order to take advantage of containerization, essentially,
okay,
and we want to be able to run on Linux as well for
right.
Monetary reasons.
So I've seen a shift in that. As a contractor, I've seen a shift in that for quite a while now. And the last, I would say, 3 big clients that I've had, they've wanted to move to .NET Core because of exactly that, because they want to be able to run, not necessarily in containers, but they want to be able to run on a Linux platform, but they want to take advantage of the internal knowledge of the .NET platform. There is a learning curve with .NET Core versus .NET Classic. Is it Classic?
Yeah.
I think it's called Classic now, they refer to it. But there is still also a use case for using .NET Classic as well. It's still a viable and relevant technology. And a lot of people, I've heard, are jumping ship. Not everybody, but a lot of people jump ship because it's shiny and new. And that is not a sensible business decision to make. But knowing that you can now, you said, containerize things. You could containerize, as we said, into a Windows container, but we want to be able to containerize into a Linux container, which is, 1, cheaper to run, resource overhead, 2, to be able to actually deploy it to a viable Linux deployment or Linux infrastructure of some description.
Yeah. So, yeah, essentially, that's a cause of tech debt. Well, I would class that as tech debt. With the current Classic framework, that's not possible. So, we've just accrued, by the nature of a new framework, we've accrued tech debt, because there's a business need.
Well, I think there it is driven by the business need, though. That tech debt becomes debt because it's a business need. Now, I've still got some personal projects that are deployed to personal shared hosting platforms. In my head, I have tech debt because I want to containerize them and because I want to move them into my DigitalOcean nodes and I want to do all of this stuff. And I can do that, and it wouldn't take me that long, really. I want to move into an Angular framework because I like it, because I prefer it, but there's no business reason for me to do that because it's serving its purpose in its current form. The only business reason is I might save £100 a year on closing my shared hosting down, but is that worth my time? Probably not.
It's interesting because, to compare with game dev doesn't have as much tech debt that's being accrued because of new and shiny features or new and shiny versions that you have to skip because it breaks. I mean, that's very common, that you just never work on the newest release of the engine or platform that you're developing for, not because you don't want to, but because you started the project 3 years ago, and if you would keep updating shit, eventually one of the updates will break one of the core of your core scripts, and fixing that will be too much of a hassle, so you just don't do it.
And this comes down to the way that games are actually designed. Games aren't designed like enterprise software in any way, shape, or form. They're monoliths, and it's...
Yeah, and here I'm coming to my question, because the tech debt that I see in game dev has more to do with the design oversight. Like when we first thought of the feature or a particular system, let's say, I don't know, your UI system or your battle system, your skill system. When we first think of it and design it, we lay it down in stone. We write it a certain way, and over years, as we keep developing, we try to start adding features, and maybe we sometimes want to do something that the system doesn't permit, so we make a very hacky solution that's like a spaghetti code, and that's the kind of tech debt that I'm most familiar with. The question is it still in the same area of things, or is it something completely different?
I think, personally, it's no different. I think when I think tech debt, my brain also goes to things like unit testing. And the reason I say that in relation to what you just said, Patrick, is that in game dev, unit testing isn't really a thing. I mean, it's becoming more of a thing in the Unity world a little bit, but it's generally not done. They don't test the code. I mean, it makes people's lives a lot easier, but it's so dependent on third-party control systems and aesthetics. Tech debt, I think, in the game world is probably more related to a vendor bringing out a new engine, or not necessarily engine, a new plugin. So I'm thinking of a physics engine, a new physics engine. Someone wants to shift from havoc to a completely different physics engine because they've got a business agreement with that particular engine provider, and that becomes tech debt, or it becomes part of the project. But then they still have to hack it together and write loads of shims in order for it actually to work. And a shim to us is just a piece of code that hacks one thing together with another thing, you know. I think it still exists. I am working currently with loads of legacy systems in the enterprise that are written in C++, and some that are written in COBOL, and some that are written in Fortran. And all of this stuff that exists is currently deployed in very high scale environments, huge amounts of PCs and components, but it works, and they've got teams that support it. But when all of these developers that I'm seeing that maintain these are in the 50s and coming up to retirement age, what happens then? What happens when because I never want to touch any of that stuff, you know?
I know. The one last Zen master of COBOL is gonna become millionaire, and people will be traveling pilgrimage. People gonna go on pilgrimage with their hardware to this holy mountain, where the wise man of COBOL can fix your issues.
So
that's what's gonna happen.
I think that in summary, I think that it's similar. Tech debt is tech debt at the end of the day. It's debt that you have related to something that code you've written, or even infrastructure that you've put together that needs to be changed and needs to be updated with the times. Even in these legacy systems where we've got systems that are coping with their workload. In fact, they have been written very specifically to cope with the volumes of data or the volumes of users or interactions or requests or whatever they're working with. And they are very specific to that use case, then yes. But as soon as, and one of the reasons I'm working with my current client is this, as soon as you need to make that into a generic product with an enterprise, some kind of enterprise design pattern or enterprise grade kind of software solution, it becomes very difficult, because not only is it old language that is hard to support and hard to scale, and old technology that it's deployed on, it's also not designed in a way that can be made generic. So therefore you say, right, let's rewrite this using C# and .NET or Java or whatever top level enterprise framework you want to work with. It doesn't matter to me what you write it in. My choice is this particular stack. It doesn't matter what stack you use to me.
Yeah.
So I suppose the question is, how have you got from your original state of having all this tech debt to a state where you're now, is it just hard work? You're now actually manage that tech debt. Is it just hard work, or is there a particular method that you've taken to get there?
So every fiber of my being wants to just rip out tech debt wherever I see it.
Yeah.
It's learning to resist that urge.
How do you identify that?
How do I identify?
How do you identify that when you say you want to rip it out? Now I see something. Yeah. I see some code that code smells or code that I'm not. I have to take a step back and hold my hands up and go, I'm not here to do that. My scope is this. I will work around what you've got there. But you're in a different position to me. You actually, I'm assuming you're the product owner. Essentially, you own that software. If you're the senior, the lead.
From a technical point of view, yes, I do. But we have other stakeholders who, and it's not just at my current company; it's previous companies as well.
Right. Other
stakeholders who are non-technical, who obviously don't understand what tech debt is.
Yep.
And don't. It's very hard to explain to someone who's not technical, as you said before, that software is never finished. Even if a feature looks like it's finished, it's probably not finished. So yeah, the only real way that I've come to accept to address tech debt is piecemeal. So very small incremental changes, which unfortunately take, honestly, a number of years. But eventually you do start to see light at the end of the tunnel. Now, there's been exceptions to this. there's one component which was literally basically unreadable, and it was kind of a black box and treated as a black box, and sort of just pushed away into the corner. And everyone just don't think about that. And if we need to change it, we're going to have to rewrite it. And I mean, eventually there was a business need to rewrite it. It was a core bit of our system. We wouldn't be able to function without it. But the only way that that tech debt was addressed was because the business needed it.
So that then becomes a priority, and then you get a budget to actually address that tech debt. But it's not really addressing the tech debt there, or rather, no, I suppose it is, because you have to say, right, let's say, for example, this is going to take us 6 months with 4 developers to develop, to rewrite this module. Now, would you do that? Would you rewrite it? I'm trying, without going into specifics, I'm trying to come up with a good use case or a scenario where that the rewrite could be avoided, but you could still service the business.
So what we're kind of doing it. So we've still got a module. Let's just put it that way. We've still got a module. What we're doing is we're doing a side-by-side rewrite. So we're not actually releasing the replacement of that module into production until it's been obviously fully tested. But the way that we kind of managed to get this on the product roadmap was to basically say, okay, in order for a team of developers to understand this module, it's actually going to take a longer amount of time to read through the code, try and understand how it works, document it, than it would be to just actually rewrite it from scratch and make it, more plug and playable,
maintainable going forward.
Maintainable. Yeah, that's the word.
Readable.
And readable. Yeah. So I mean, this module was to the point of we could not make changes and reliably say that any of the changes that we made were going to work at all.
So this is where we come back to test-driven development as well, and having a unit test for things. And that if it's done correctly, we get code to a point where you can get yourself in a knot, and you can create more tech debt if you don't write tests properly and you're not writing for the business. Even unit tests should really be written with a business focus, and kind of. I mean, it's difficult to really make a call on that because it's dependent on the use case and the situation and the level you're doing the tests at as well. But I think if we... I've lost my train of thought there. What was I talking about?
Unit tests.
Yeah. So I think if we focus on putting the right unit tests together, and we don't go too far with it, we actually get to a point where we've got maintainable code that can be readable and is self-documenting, and that considerably reduces forward moving tech debt. Now the problem is you can introduce tech debt in that situation by again, a business need. If a business comes to you and says, right, we've got a week to implement this new feature or to change this, what's the first thing that gets dropped in that situation?
Of course.
The test.
Definitely not unit tests, would they be?
I saw it with a recent client a couple of years ago, actually. I wrote a beautifully designed REST system, REST service with Angular front end. I didn't do any Angular front end tests, sorry, but I did look. Back end was covered to hell. The guy that I handed it off to was actually the business owner. He was a contractor like me, and I handed it off to him. And he'd never done test-driven development before, but he wanted me to do the test-driven development and put the extra time and effort into it. As soon as he needed to modify it, he didn't come back to ask me, budget constraints or whatever, it doesn't really matter. He modified it, but because the DevOps system that I put in place, the CI/CD system, was very heavily dependent on all the tests passing and passing to a certain coverage and whatnot, which is another thing entirely. It was failing, and he couldn't get it onto the servers, so he just commented out all the tests. Yeah. Now, when he then asked me to go back into it and help him make another change, I said to him, what have you done this for? Why have you commented other tests out? And I ended up giving him some training on why TDD is important, especially if you've implemented a system with it in the first place. And I don't know if he's taken it on board, and I don't know if he's using it going forward, but I did hopefully clarify what it's for, why it was useful. But I think the tests are still commented out. I don't think they've got... And I just refused to work on it because I was like, I'm sorry, but I gave it to you with 99% confidence that any changes would break a test, and now you've modified it, and now anything I do could have so many cascading effects. It was a huge, complex REST service. So,
you see, that makes me wonder if, because if you would compare building code to building a building, there are just certain things that you feasibly could skip on, like, any sort of security of people working on it. So OSHA, but this could be to the detriment of, obviously people working on it and the project because delays and the eventual safety of people who will be using that building. And the same case could be made for TDD, that it is, skipping on that is hazardous to the developer's health, at least mental, surely, and then, to the potential safety of the code in the future. So I wonder if, in a distant future, when code will become more and more, will start to have more and more direct impact on human lives, where there will be some sort of like a OSHA-like for TDDs with government agencies enforcing it the same way they do enforce OSHA.
I don't think government agencies will get involved at that level. I've got to be honest with you, especially not the UK government agencies. The tech in UK IT is ridiculous.
I mean, sooner or later they might have to. So
We had a UK crisis a few years ago. We had the WannaCry virus that hit the NHS and banks and numerous big businesses all at once, and it basically ransomware that just locked out so many PCs and workstations and servers and ransomed them. And some people paid the ransom, a lot of people didn't. But it still hasn't really opened people's eyes. They've just updated the virus checkers.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous, honestly. The level of bureaucracy involved and security systems that are put in place that focus on the wrong thing, focus on legacy practices and legacy systems, and the amount of budget that goes into legacy systems is... I mean, this isn't across the board, but it does apply to a lot of government agencies. Okay.
Well, I used to think that all it takes is one tragedy to put legislation in place, but nah.
All it takes is one tragedy to get $1 billion donated to an art project. Yes. That's set the tone, hasn't it? Okay, so when we first talked, Mark, we said we were going to focus on, or we were going to talk about inheriting this tech debt, and we were going to talk about working. Not necessarily with any particular person, but working with a tech lead. Now, that makes bad decisions, that gets you in the situation where you are acquiring tech debt. Now, can we talk about that to start off with? I don't want to force us down that route if you...
We can talk about that, yes.
Okay, so again, we don't want to be mentioning any names, we're not mentioning any companies or anything like that, but we have, all of us, it's me and Mark have both, and I'm sure Patrick as well, but we've experienced situations where we've worked for people, either line management or people above us in the technical line, that have made bad technical decisions, whether it be, let's drop the tests, which is a simple, right, okay, let's drop the tests because they don't fully understand what they're for, or it could be any number of other reasons. Are you able to divulge any kind of use cases or any situations that you've had to deal with, and how you dealt with them? Yeah,
very, very strange, this one, because it's very cut and dry. But basically, I have worked for a company previously who... tech lead at the time decided that they wanted... We had a rudimentary, simple mobile app, so an Android and an iOS app. Tech lead decided at the time we should bring this in-house, despite the fact that this app, it was a very simple app. Didn't do much. It allowed you to record video and it uploaded it to a secure endpoint.
So you say bring it in-house, you mean bring the new development in-house or a current, an existing app?
So basically replace it.
Oh, right,
with,
okay.
Replace that app with a new app, but bring that knowledge in-house. And that resulted in us hiring a junior developer with no experience of developing mobile applications.
Right.
And you can probably guess what the end of that story is.
Yeah, I mean, I've been in situations like that where I've worked with people and they've been in charge of sometimes a fairly complex system and they just haven't had the support or the knowledge to be able to maintain it, or even say no when they don't want the pride is hurt maybe when they say no to things, or they think they can deal with it. Again, this is the Dunning-Kruger thing that we've talked about quite a few times on this podcast, where they think they know more than they actually do, and then that inherently gives us all tech debt to deal with.
So what we were left with was basically no one in the team not really having any knowledge of it was Xamarin, by the way, of Xamarin. And we basically had a very, very buggy production application. And the tech debt that brought across was, number one, we had to do all of the things that you have to do in order to deploy a mobile app. So, manage all of the App Store, the Play Store, go through all of the CI and CD, which was completely separate from our normal CI/CD pipeline. So we had two CI/CD and CD pipelines that we had to maintain. So it wasn't even really a code tech debt; it was a framework and everything tech debt, and also code tech debt, because we had to maintain this Xamarin application, which, as if you guys have ever had experience with Xamarin development, it's
lovely.
It's something to be learned. It's not like if you can write C#, you can instantly develop a Xamarin application. Yeah. It's got its nuances.
Yes.
And it was all of the overhead of that brought, the extra pressure, that sort of thing. And obviously we'd committed to clients. But there is a happy ending to it, which is essentially, and I never agree with outsourcing, but in terms of a simple mobile app that does one thing and doesn't really require updates, outsourcing is the way to go. So that is actually what we ended up doing. And now we have no overhead of building the mobile app and releasing the mobile app. We don't need anyone in the team to be sort of really technically aware of, how to build an Android or an iOS app. So we're freed up to do other things that deliver more value to the business. And in the end, the app in the last year and a half hasn't had a single update, other than for new iOS versions and new Android versions. But
so I've got a current client that I thoroughly enjoyed doing the work for, but they had no internal C# experience, and they wanted a Xamarin application, and they also wanted a RESTful service with an Angular front end, which is my speciality these days. That's kind of what my bread and butter is. So I was hired to do the as a contractor to do the RESTful service, which was the kind of everything that the Xamarin app, and there was also a Unity interface as well. All of those kind of interacted with my service, but the Xamarin app was done by another contractor. I'm very keen on my documentation. No one's perfect, and to be fair, the work that I did for the startup where we worked together, Mark, is probably now classed as tech debt, because although I did do lots of technical documentation and put it together, it was written with WCF. It was, which is still again relevant in the right use case, but it probably should have been a RESTful service. Oh, actually, it was WCF RESTful, thinking about it, which is a bit of a hack, but it worked. But yeah, as I said, I'm aware that a lot of the time a contractor leaves a place, they are the evil one that people, people then go, right, this guy's done this wrong and he's not here to fix it. And then now we've got it. That is also tech debt that you're inheriting from other people. Anyway, so this current client, they cannot get, I'm lucky in that I can split my time between clients. So I can provide them some support for these updates that they want for the server side of things, the RESTful service and the database and everything else. But the other developer, the Xamarin Specialist and the Unity Specialist, disappeared off the face of the earth. Well, not disappeared, but not available. They are now unavailable. So that is now officially tech debt. I cannot help them with the Xamarin side because, as you said, I know C#, but I'm not a WCF guy. I'm not a Xamarin guy. I have no idea really how all of that sits together. I've got an idea, but I'm not an expert, so I wouldn't ever take it on. The Unity stuff, I would say I'm a junior in it, and I wouldn't like to get involved with code that somebody else has written fully and wholly, you know? I'd prefer to write it from scratch myself with my own design patterns and everything. So I can help with it, but it'll be support, you know, it'll be giving advice more than anything. So yeah, more different types of tech debt there. We've got inherited from people that implemented it.
Holy shit, I just realized that, like, when you mentioned taking over a Unity project after someone, I realized, and you said that in the context of it being actually a tech dev, I realized I've dealt a fuck ton with it, because that was actually one of the selling points that I had for joining Scopely, my current company, that, hey, I've dealt with existing projects before, and I had to maintain them, and I had to get in and learn them, and in some cases the original source code may or may not be written on stone tablets and bestowed upon us on a lonely mountain. So yeah, that can be painful. Ouch! You just triggered Vietnam flashbacks in me.
Yeah, so we've all worked with it. We've all worked with tech debt in the past.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, so, Mark, is there anything else you want to talk about with tech debt? Anything we haven't mentioned? Anything that's on your mind?
I suppose we didn't really cover the tech debt that's incurred by the business knowingly creating tech debt. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Every developer loves that. Every developer loves that.
Yeah.
Do you mean Do you mean the one where you say, "Oh, we really shouldn't be doing this," and business is, "Yeah, whatever, let's still do this." Oh, I'm in for a story. Please do tell me more.
You deal with that in the future. We don't care.
Yeah. So I mean, it's the typical. This is especially true with non-technical people. A stakeholder will come up to you and say, "Can we do X?" You then develop a prototype or maybe even an alpha. You then run that, confirm with the stakeholder, and the stakeholder does not understand what the difference between an alpha, a beta, or a production app is, and then you end up with the alpha app in production.
Yeah, that happens more times than you would think. I do desperately try to make my alphas, betas as production ready as possible, but it's not always possible. I'm actually in the process of pushing a proof of concept. It's not even an alpha or a beta toolkit, and I've specifically labelled it as a toolkit, as the ability for us to connect to one system and get data into another system and use all of these funky scripts to do it. I don't think there's danger of that going in production, though, based on what I know, because it's essentially there to get funding. So I'm in a lucky position there, but I've been in lots of positions before with people not understanding what we do.
Chris, that sounds like a famous last words. I'm waiting only to discover that, you know, in 20 years your app is gonna take down some big ass company because they put it into
It's certainly not. I mean, I've put comments on all of the scripts saying development only. If you need to implement this, it needs to be done. A lot of things need to. To be fair, it's not really suitable. It's not. The use case for what I've put together, it's essentially hacking together so many different systems that aren't available in certain circumstances. I'm spinning up servers in Docker containers and things like that just to hack something together. When we actually agree with third-party vendors what's going to go on, that's when it will start becoming a more viable production-based environment. But I know for a fact that the thing that I'm putting together for later on this year, there's something going on that I need to get something ready for, and that needs to be a fully fledged version with a simulator at one end. I can't talk about too much detail, but once that's in place, I imagine most of the code that I put together is going to end up copied and pasted into the production environment. But hopefully they'll do tests because they've got
okay. So
strict...
to pivot away from Chris so that he doesn't break his NDAs. Mark, let's imagine a hypothetical scenario where a company hired a junior developer and he made an alpha version of an app that got into production, and then they were maintaining it for a year, and now it became such a monstrosity that even the upper management understands that it has to be dealt with. They bring you as an expert. What do you do? How do you even deal with like this sort of catastrophe of everything that could go wrong went wrong, and now we have to somehow fix it?
It really does depend. The classic developer
Rewrite.
The answer is going to be rewrite. But there's a way of rewriting things rather than just sort of tools down, let's rewrite. In terms of how I've tackled that before, it's generally been a rewrite, but deploying it alongside the existing version and then checking for feature parity and function parity as well.
A/B testing type stuff.
Essentially A/B testing.
So be slightly smarter than taking a sledgehammer to a hard drive.
Yeah, so if possible, like don't even touch the existing code base. If that exists in a module, don't even attempt to, sort of do anything in that module. Create a new module. That's your rewrite.
Or even write an adapter pattern or something that allows you to overlay or abstract from whatever. Again, it depends on the use case, really. It depends on what you've got.
Yeah, and it depends on how big the mess is. If it's spaghetti central, and we're only eating meatballs for the next 5 years.
Then, I've used it quite a few times in the podcast for different scenarios. But I once worked for a client that had a very, very high pressure deadline. They needed me to get something. Basically, they were closing one of their places, one of their offices, and they had hundreds of jobs that needed to be moved over to another office, another place. It was a production-based environment and a warehouse. I can say that at least. It was a warehouse, and they were shutting it down and then moving all the jobs to this other warehouse. And when I got there, they hired me to what I found out to be a copy and paste job of an old v2.9 app. God knows what version of v2.9, because I didn't even look at it. I looked at it at 5 seconds and said, no, this isn't happening. And every single job, so bearing in mind there was about 100 odd jobs, needed a copy and paste of a full application into a Visual Source Safe repository. Yes. And slight bits of code modified within this monolithic God method that was just indented to hell. I mean, it was spaghetti code hell to the point of... I mean, sometimes you can abstract too much, in your code, but my lord, this was horrific. And whenever I tried to modify it, the existing developer was like, no, I don't. He didn't understand how to return true or false from a function, for God's sake. He just didn't get object-oriented programming. And I ended up with saying, look, no, I'm going to write a generic system, and then we're going to have ETL packages that do all of the donkey work for each of the jobs. This generic system will be a single database where you can import data into and then throw it out to machines and things like that. Oh, that was a hard job.
I think you can kind of mitigate the way I mitigate the danger of an alpha or even a beta getting into production is usually when I start, so we work in sprints. Usually before we start a sprint, we have a scoping period, and within the scoping period, we kind of gather requirements essentially from various stakeholders. But as part of that scoping period, we kind of develop. I don't even know what the term would be. Maybe a spike, just to prove that certain things are possible. Very recently, we were trying to do some file manipulation using S3. Amazon S3, and turns out what we wanted to do wasn't possible. And if we didn't do that sort of spike, we didn't do that sort of scoping period, the scope would have been way off, and the requirements as a result of that period had to change, and then obviously our estimates changed. But doing that work not as part of the feature, so basically doing an alpha piece of work shouldn't really ever be classed as a feature.
Yeah,
that's how I see it anyway.
I mean, I'm lucky right now in that that's essentially what I'm doing. I'm spiking, I'm proof of concepting all of the potential options. So I'm currently looking at like 3 or 4 different providers for particular technology stacks, and I'm figuring out which one's more suitable. Not just doing a feasibility study, but also trying to figure out technically what do they offer as a bit on a business level. What do they offer in order to be able to get funding and finance from the business to be able to implement them in the future next year. So luckily most of the stuff I'm doing is just, it's either throwaway or it just needs to be documented. But because they've taken me on as a solution architect / senior developer, I'm not developing production level code. I'm not involved in that at all. There's a team of 50 developers doing that kind of stuff, but I'm completely segregated from that, and I'm pushing my findings and writing documentation to separate repositories that are just going to sit there until someone needs to pull it and have a look at it, you know. So I don't think what I'm doing will end up being in production, but it's there for when people need to speed up their development processes, I suppose. Anyway, so I think we have reached the end of the show. It's been wonderful having you on, Mark, but before we finish, we have a section called RTFM. And all techies know what RTFM stands for. And it's a bit of a whinge. It's our catharsis section where we talk about things that have annoyed us this week. Pat's been struggling for a few weeks to say anything that's annoyed him. I actually have one this week. Something that I've been dealing with for the last few weeks. I'll go first, to be fair. So currently I am in the process of trying to... I've had various different MSDN subscriptions over the years. Now, MSDN is Microsoft Developer Network, for those people who don't know, and they range from £300 all the way to £10,000 for a particular subscription. I don't need anything massively fancy. I just need Visual Studio, SQL Server, you know, or versions of operating systems and that kind of thing. So there is something out there called the Microsoft Action Pack, which is very little known. And it's you have to sign up to something called the Microsoft Partner Network and do some kind of capability studies, capability exercises just to prove that you're a developer, so you know what you're talking about, so you can get access to Visual Studio. £395. It used to be £150. It's gone up slowly over the years. And obviously, as an individual, I want to pay £395 rather than £1,200 for the year or something like that. So I'm pushing for this. My previous subscription was a Visual Studio Enterprise subscription, which cost a fortune. I needed it for something very specific. Now that, I think, has broken my Microsoft account. I've used my single email address for years with Microsoft, and it's been a personal email address, and I've had what's now called Azure DevOps, which was Visual Studio Online, Visual Studio Team Services, or whatever you want to call it, for hosting a lot of my enterprise source code. I use MSDN for all my licenses. Basically, this MAP subscription gives me an MSDN subscription with all of these Azure benefits, and Azure, like £100 Azure credit or something a month or something as well. I'm struggling. When I signed up for it, you have to go onto the website, log in as your account, and then click an enroll button. You think that was easy, but unfortunately my current account cannot, my current personal email, which I've been using for decades, which I've built up an entire Microsoft world around, doesn't work. I cannot subscribe to it at all, and I don't know why. I've got no idea. It just keeps telling me, and I've been on to Microsoft support. I've had them on my PC actually trying to go through the process with me as well, which is unheard of, to be fair. I've got
wow, I mean, props to Microsoft support. Yeah, I mean, they didn't solve anything, but at least they fucking tried.
And then that got escalated to technical support because it was, I think it was a first-line support guy that was helping me. He was great, you know, he's great for the level, I suppose, that he was working at, but he was very specifically focused on the partner network. So I've now been, I got it escalated to technical support. They went through the entire process again. They even wanted me to record the process via Microsoft Screen Recorder to document exactly what I did, which I'd already done. And I've already step-by-step instructions, all of the errors, all of the... I mean, I'm a really detail-orientated person. They haven't read my previous ticket, you know, the previous entries on the ticket. And it's just gone to a point now where, unfortunately, I've had a bit of a personal thing going on over the last couple of weeks. I haven't been able to respond to it. Now, they've closed the ticket today, so I can't do anything with it. And probably all of that data is now lost. I'll have to restart the whole fucking thing again. So yes, that's my rant for today. And I'm very annoyed because I've got less than a week before my entire Azure account is going to get deleted off the face of the planet, which includes all of my source code, all of my repositories, enterprise repositories, all of my builds set up in Azure DevOps, which, I mean, fair enough, it's only like 6 or 7 repositories, but it's beside the point. You know, I've built up a hell of an infrastructure there, and I think once it gets deleted, I'm not going to be able to. And basically, they want me to sign up to a Visual Studio Enterprise account because that's what I previously had. And I think that's probably why I can't enroll in the Microsoft Partner Network. But nobody's actually listening to me, and nobody seems to understand exactly what the problem is. What's happened is I've got an entry in a database somewhere. I've got a record. That's what's happened. There's a record with my email address in a database that shouldn't be there from 15 years ago or something. You know, from when I used to be an MPN member. And it's conflicting or something.
God fucking damn it,
Rant
that sounds
over.
like a right pain. Holy shit.
The RTFM doesn't have to be, by the way, about technical stuff, Mark. It can be anything in the world whatsoever. Have you got anything this week, Pat?
Actually, yeah. And because I'm growing increasingly frustrated. Like before, it was like, haha, it's kind of funny. Now it's, oh my god, this is actually impeding on my life, unknowingly. I mean, it's like just working with one monitor. Like I don't understand. I don't understand how this happened. Am I like monitor addicted now? Like am I a screen real estate junkie or some shit? Because like honestly, there is literally nothing. Like right now, I'm working. Like thank God. Like okay, you shut on Microsoft. I'm gonna praise them. Thank fucking God for like those virtual desktops in Microsoft. You know, in the newest Windows, the Windows 10, because I have like 6 at this point. And the number keeps decreasing because I need different contexts. You know, I need for work, I need for this project, I need for DNI, for live streaming, because I can't spread my shit through monitors. It's driving me crazy. I really need and thank God that paycheck is soon because I need a desk so I can stack the fat fucking monitors.
I'm lucky. I've got a lot of monitors. So
I actually don't need a desk. I need a power drill and a fuck ton of Visa mounts. And I'm gonna be drilling the fuck out of my wall. I have them everywhere. It's gonna be fucking amazing.
So this is why it's called the RTFM.
Here's my
sensory advisory. Parent advisory.
Yeah,
right.
Because Chris, you can't rage. Like you don't have the burning passion within you.
I do have a burning passion within me, but I'm too old now, Pat. I'm too old to care that much about something. You know, it's a mild annoyance. There are so many other things in the world that are much more pressing and more important than my RTFMs, to be honest. literally nothing is more important on this God's given earth than me having more monitors. Yeah. So, Mark, have you got anything you want to rant about?
It's strangely, it's quite connected to your issue.
Okay.
Not really strictly related to Azure, but it's definitely MSDN related. So, my current company had a BizSpark account.
I also had one, and that's probably half of the problem. BizSpark actually provides a startup MSDN license for small businesses, and I used it for 3 or 4 years, I think, or however long it lasted. Go on, Mark, sorry.
Yeah. So basically, ours is coming to the end because we're basically maturing into a medium-sized company. So we probably don't even qualify for it really anymore. But they basically just revoked all of our licenses. But that's not strictly true because if you went to the dashboard and you tried to reassign a license, rather than reassigning a license to a different user, it just revoked it. So it looked like it was processing and it was reassigning.
Do you have to do this via the Microsoft Partner Network?
Yeah.
So you're having very similar problems to me. I'm having I mean, I've ended up creating my own. I've enrolled with a different account, a different email account, which is nonsense to me because I've been using my main one for years, and now I'm at a point where nothing's working. I can't reassign licenses. I can't do anything with it, and I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. I just want them to delete everything and let me start again, you know? In MPN, at least, not on Azure.
Yeah. Well, it resulted basically in me revoking 2 of the team members' licenses because I was trying to reassign old licenses, if that makes any sense. So we had members of the team that have left the business, and I was trying to reassign licenses over to new users, and then in the end, it just revoked those licenses. So you just saw like an available licenses count just going down and down every time we did anything.
Yeah.
And to be honest, it's the same story with you. We had to call. We had honestly, I think it was like 15 emails back and forth between Microsoft and ourselves. I think we even had a call at one point, and eventually it was just sort of, oh, okay, we know what it is, and then.
Well, that's the thing is, I just want to speak to somebody who knows what the problem is, or can read everything that I've told them and go, oh yeah, okay, this record needs deleting or removing or something, you know?
Yeah.
So frustrating. So frustrating.
It all boils down to licenses.
It does indeed. Oh, right, anyway, so we are now at the end of the show. Thanks to everybody in Twitch chat. Awesome 90. Drinking the corpse vomit. I love that name. That's John, by the way. That's John that we used to work with, Mark.
Ah,
yeah, it's a lovely name, that. Avina, and I think that's it for people who've mentioned things today. So thank you very much for getting involved. And yeah.
You know, it's not a stream if we don't fail somehow, sorry. But anyhow, if you want to complain about me not hitting the timing, you can always visit our website, dnistream.live, where we have a wonderful submission form, and you can actually fill it in and complain about me, or submit yourself to the podcast as a guest if you would like to join us, or any other reason for contacting. We have also all of our social media links and everything, so basically dnistream.live. Oh, also Discord.
Indeed, yes.
So, yeah.
And the source code for our website is also available on github.com/documentation not included. It is we've talked about it a lot today, so it's a .NET Core RESTful API with a Angular front end. I haven't done anything for ages because I've had another website to do and work and personal things going on. So sorry, everybody, but I will try and get on that. And finally, thank you very much, Mark. I hope you've enjoyed being a guest, and our listeners have learned about tech debt to some extent. If you've got anything to pimp whatsoever, and you've got any personal projects you want to talk about your business or anything like that, please do so now. If not, then great.
Well, I did have some open source repos, but I made them private when Microsoft bought GitHub. So thanks Microsoft.
Okay.
But yeah, so nothing really pimp worthy. So I will remain pimpless.
Fair enough. So we hope to see everybody next week on twitch.tv/DNI stream at 7 p.m. on Thursday, 7 p.m. UK time on Thursdays. Keep your eyes out on our Twitter account at DNI stream for any updates, or come into our Discord chat and get involved. We've had a little bit going on this week, but I think Josie's back next week, so we should be back to normal social interactions with everybody. So thank you very much. Cheers, Mark. See you all later.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.